She just sent the wrong text message, a wrong number, a moment of carelessness on a rainy night in Manhattan. And Ivy Callahan's fate collided head-on with the city's most dangerous man. Damian Morello didn't save anyone. He had no kindness. He had a criminal empire, a gunman, and secrets that could bury an entire city. But that night, reading the text of a terrified stranger alone in a fancy restaurant, he did something no one had ever seen before. He came. If you enjoyed this story, hit like now and comment the name of the city you're reading. I want to know how far my story has come. The rain came down like something personal. Not the kind of rain that washes streets clean, the other kind. The kind that finds every gap in your coat, every crack in your shoes, every place you thought you'd sealed up tight. It hit the sidewalks of Manhattan with a sound like static, like white noise turned violent, and Ivy Callahan stood under the narrow overhang of a bodega on 53rd Street with her phone pressed against her sternum and her breath coming too fast. She was going to be late. She was already nervous, and now she was standing in the freezing rain because she'd stepped outside to make a phone call. She wasn't sure she wanted to make, and somehow that felt like a metaphor for everything wrong with her life lately, though she was too tired to unpack it. Her coat was from 3 winters ago. The lining had started separating at the left shoulder. She kept meaning to fix it. She kept meaning to do a lot of things. The phone call to her friend Dana had lasted 4 minutes and accomplished nothing except confirming that, yes, Preston Vale was a real person. Yes, he was legitimately wealthy. And yes, Dana had given Ivy his number through a mutual contact who swore up and down that he was a good guy, a normal guy, a guy worth 1 dinner. Ivy had dressed for the dinner in the only good blouse she owned and had taken the subway because she couldn't afford a car service and had arrived at a restaurant that cost more per entree than she spent on groceries in 2 weeks. The host had looked at her coat, just for a second, but long enough. She'd been at the table for 20 minutes. Preston had arrived 6 minutes late, which she decided wasn't worth counting. He was handsome in a way that felt constructed, jaw too deliberate, smile too ready, the kind of good-looking that takes effort and doesn't let you forget it. He ordered a bottle of wine without asking her what she liked. He asked her 2 questions about herself and didn't wait for the full answers before pivoting back to something he wanted to say. He touched her forearm when he made a point, 2 fingers resting against her wrist, and the 3rd time he did it, she'd said she needed air and come outside to call Dana. Dana had told her she was being too sensitive. Ivy looked at her phone. $87 in checking. A text from the electric company. And a thread with Dana that ended with, "Just give him a chance, Ivy. Not everyone is a red flag." She typed the message without thinking much about it. She typed it fast, muscle memory almost, the kind of message she'd sent Dana 100 times before when a date went sideways. "Please call me in 10 minutes pretending there's an emergency. My date keeps touching my arm and smiling like a serial killer." She hit send. She watched the little delivered notification appear. Then she watched the typing bubble materialize. She frowned. Dana never responded that fast. Dana was probably on her 3rd glass of wine, watching something on television, and had her notifications on delay, which was a thing Dana did and refused to admit. The message came through. "Where are you?" Ivy stared at the screen, typed back. "Wrong number. Sorry." 3 dots. Pause. 3 more dots. "Stay where you are." She looked up at the rain for a moment, then back at the phone. The number was unfamiliar. Not Dana's, not anyone she recognized, a 212 area code, but that covered half of Manhattan. She'd clearly fat-fingered something in a hurry. She started to type an apology, the reflexive kind. The kind she typed a dozen times a day because apologizing had become so automatic she sometimes caught herself doing it to furniture she'd walked into. Before she finished the message, the phone buzzed again. "What restaurant?" Ivy felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. She didn't answer. She went back inside. The restaurant was called Aurelius. It occupied the 40th floor of a tower overlooking the southern end of Central Park, and it had the particular atmosphere of places where money is so present it becomes invisible. No prices on the menu, no noise above a certain register, every surface either marble or dark walnut, or something that cost more than it looked. Ivy had Googled it before coming. She'd read a review that described it as quietly devastating. She hadn't known how to take that. Preston was on his phone when she returned to the table. He finished the call before she sat down, slid the phone into his breast pocket, and gave her the smile again. The constructed one. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said. "You looked a little pale when you came back in. Weather getting to you?" "I'm fine." He poured more wine into her glass without asking. She noticed his own glass was barely touched. "You know," he said, leaning back, "Dana told me you were smart. She was being modest, apparently." Ivy looked at him. "What does that mean?" "I just mean you seem sharper than she described, more self-possessed." He smiled. "I like that." There was something in the way he said it. The word sharp from his mouth didn't feel like a compliment so much as a category, like he was classifying her. She picked up her water glass. Her fingers weren't entirely steady. Under the table, her phone buzzed. She waited, looked at Preston, who was now saying something about a property deal in Dubai. Waited another moment, then glanced down. Unknown number. The same 212. Leave through the kitchen in 90 seconds. Her stomach dropped. Another message, immediate. Do not let him take you anywhere private. She set the phone face down on her thigh. Her heart was doing something wrong. Not racing exactly, more like losing rhythm, like an engine with something caught in it. She looked at Preston. He was talking about Dubai. His wine glass was still barely touched. Hers was full again. She thought about the way he'd poured it. She thought about the small, smooth motion of it, practiced, automatic. She thought about the word self-possessed and the way he'd said it like he was already imagining her the other way. Then the restaurant changed. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like an absence of sound, but conversations dropping in stages, like lights going out in a building one floor at a time, until the whole room had gone to something near silence, and the only sounds were soft music and the rain against the glass and Ivy's own pulse behind her ears. She turned her head toward the entrance. The man who walked in wasn't tall in the way that makes people take notice. He was tall in the way that makes people step back. He wore a black overcoat over a charcoal suit, and he moved through the entryway with the particular stillness of someone who has never in his life had to announce himself. Behind him, at a slight distance that made clear they were with him and not near him, two men followed. Both of them wore the same expression. Not hostile, not blank, something in between. The expression of men whose job requires them to see everything and show nothing. The manager appeared from somewhere and immediately became very attentive. The man didn't look at him. Amber eyes swept the room once, a single smooth scan, and then stopped. They stopped on Ivy. She didn't know him. She'd never seen his face. But she felt the attention like a change in air pressure, like the room had just tilted 2 degrees in her direction. Preston had gone rigid beside her. His hand, which had been moving toward the wine bottle, stopped in mid-air. The man crossed the restaurant in a straight line, not weaving between tables. People simply adjusted quietly, without being asked. A couple turned their chairs. A waiter stepped sideways. The room moved around him the way water moves around stone, unconsciously, inevitably. He stopped at their table. He looked at Preston. Preston looked like a man who had just realized he was standing in a street and heard brakes. "Mr. Morello," he said. His voice didn't break, but it came close. Damian Morello didn't acknowledge the name. His gaze had already moved. It moved to Ivy. She sat very still. She was aware of 100 things at once. The fraying at her coat sleeve draped over the chair back, the mascara she could feel had smudged under her left eye from the cold outside. The fact that she was gripping her water glass with both hands now, the fact that this man was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read at all. Not predatory, not curious. Something more serious than either of those. Something that looked bizarrely like assessment without judgment. "Your date is over," he said. Not to Preston, to her. Preston forced a laugh. It came out wrong. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding here." "There hasn't." 2 words, flat and absolute and cold as the marble under their feet. Damian leaned forward slightly, not toward Ivy, toward Preston, and his voice dropped into a register that didn't carry past the table. "I know what you do with women you bring somewhere private," he said. "I know about the vial in your left breast pocket. I know about the recordings. I know about the account you keep the recordings in. I know the name of the prosecutor who's been looking for evidence of exactly this for the past 18 months. Preston's face went the color of old ash. And I know, Damian continued, so quietly it was almost conversational, that you were told to arrange this particular meeting. I know who told you, and I know why. The silence between them lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Damian straightened. His two men, who had positioned themselves at either side of the table without Ivy noticing them move, reached for Preston simultaneously. Not roughly, not with any visible aggression, simply and completely, with the efficiency of men who have done this before and found that making it look like nothing is more frightening than making it look like something. Preston made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Something small and silver fell from the inner pocket of his jacket as his arm was pulled back. It hit the marble floor and rolled 2 inches and stopped. A vial. Glass. Sealed. The nearest table fell entirely silent. The table beyond that one went quiet a moment later. Ivy stared at the vial on the floor. The shape of the evening reconstructed itself in her mind. The wine poured while she wasn't looking, the full glass she hadn't drunk, the moment early in the dinner when Preston had excused himself for 3 minutes and come back and immediately topped off her glass. The Dubai story. All of it ambient noise designed to fill the time while he waited for her to drink. She thought she might be sick. You investigated him? Her voice came out flat. Strange. Like it belonged to someone else. Yes. She looked up at Damian. He was still watching her. In the last hour? Yes. She didn't know what to do with that. He extended his hand, not taking her arm, not guiding her, just offering, the way you'd offer a door to someone and wait. She took his hand and stood. Her knees weren't right. She registered the unsteadiness and hated it. Hated that she was unsteady. Hated that her body was doing this in public in front of a room full of people who were all very carefully looking at everything except the table near the window. Damian's grip tightened slightly when she wavered. Not dramatically, just enough. Outside, the rain came down harder. The awning above the entrance offered maybe 4 feet of coverage, and cold air came in from both sides and hit her full in the face. She pulled her hand free and stepped to the railing at the edge of the awning. She needed something to hold. She put both hands on it, wet metal under her palms, and breathed. Behind her, she heard Damian say something to one of his men in a voice too low to follow. Then silence. Then footsteps, and he was standing beside her. You okay? The question surprised her, the directness of it, the lack of ceremony. No, she said. That's fine. She laughed. The sound came out cracked and a little wrong, and she pressed her fingers over her mouth. That's an odd thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. She turned and looked at him properly for the first time. He was maybe 35, maybe older. It was hard to tell because his face had that quality some men get where stress or time or something carves their features into something more definite rather than eroding them. The jaw was sharp. The eyes were amber, genuinely amber, which she hadn't expected, and they were watching her with an attention that was uncomfortable in the same way that direct sunlight is uncomfortable. Not harmful exactly, just very present. She thought about the text message. The wrong number. Stay where you are. And then this. Who are you? She asked. He looked at her for a moment before answering. Damian Morello. The name didn't mean anything to her immediately. Then it did. Dana had mentioned it once, or someone had, in the context of something in the news, something about shipping contracts and a federal investigation that had gone nowhere. And someone had said the name the way people say the names of weather systems, not as a person, but as a condition. She looked at him. You run? Yes. She looked away, back at the rain. I texted the wrong number, she said. I know. You came anyway. He didn't answer that right away. She heard him shift his weight slightly on the wet pavement. Yes, he said finally. Why? A pause. Not an evasive one. The kind of pause that comes before an honest answer the person is still deciding how honest to be. Because of the way you wrote it, he said. She turned her head. His expression hadn't changed. No softness in it, no apology. Just that same direct quality, that sense of a man who had spent so long in environments where clarity was a survival strategy that he'd stopped knowing how to be otherwise. What does that mean? You were scared, he said, but you made a joke about it. People who make jokes about the thing that's scaring them are usually trying to manage it alone because they don't think anyone will actually come. Her throat tightened. She looked back at the street. A taxi went by, its light smearing across the wet asphalt. I didn't want anyone to come, she said. I just wanted my friend to call and give me an excuse to leave. I know. So why? Because I could, he said simply, and I was nearby, and something about it bothered me. She studied the reflection of lights in the puddle nearest the curb. Bothered him. She turned that over. How did you know about the vial? She asked. About all of that. I have people who can find things quickly when I ask them to. In an hour. Yes. She exhaled slowly. That's useful. I was going to say disturbing. His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more contained. That too, he said. She became aware that one of his men had reappeared at a slight distance, holding an umbrella open and waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that waiting was a large part of his job description. I can get you a car, Damian said, or I can have my driver take you home, wherever you want to go. She thought about her apartment, the third-floor walk-up in Astoria, the buzzing overhead light in the hallway that the landlord had promised to fix in September, the silence of it. I live in Queens, she said. Okay. That's not... She stopped, tried again. That's not a very... She gave up on the sentence. Most people don't come for strangers. He looked at her steadily. I'm aware that I'm not most people, he said. She almost said that's not what I meant. Instead, she said, thank you, for Preston. Don't thank me. Why not? He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite readable, something that had an edge to it that she couldn't place. Because you may not want to later, he said. Before she could ask what that meant, he nodded to his man with the umbrella, and the man stepped forward and offered it to Ivy, and a black car materialized at the curb so smoothly it seemed to have been conjured from somewhere rather than driven. The car was warmer than any car she'd been in years. The seats were leather, dark and soft, and there was no divider between the front and back, just a quiet driver who looked neither at her nor away from her and kept his eyes on the road and his hands at 10 and 2, like a person who had been told exactly where to drive and intended to do exactly that. Ivy sat with her coat spread open and her hands in her lap and watched Queens gradually replace Manhattan through the window. She kept thinking about the vial. She kept thinking about Preston's face when Damian had spoken. That particular quality of fear, not the fear of someone falsely accused, but the fear of someone correctly identified. She kept thinking about what Damian had said. I know who told you, and I know why. Not, I know about the drugs. Not, I know what you do. But, I know who told you to arrange this particular meeting, which meant Preston had been pointed at her specifically, which meant someone had set this up. She sat with that in the dark of the moving car, the city lights sliding across the windows, and tried to figure out why anyone would bother. She was nobody. She had $87. She had dead-end data entry work she'd picked up after the hospital accounting job fell apart when the hospital restructured and she'd been in the third tier of cuts. She had her father's medical debt, and a lease she was 2 months from not being able to cover, and a friend who told her she was too sensitive. Nobody had a reason to set her up. Except she was nobody, and she knew what nobody meant. Nobody meant useful. Nobody meant no one would make a fuss. Nobody meant exactly the kind of person you aimed at someone when you wanted a woman in a room with them and didn't want the woman to be missed. Preston was connected to someone. Damian had said as much. She took out her phone, stared at the thread with the unknown number, stared at those 2 words. Stay where you are. She typed, who was he working for? Watched the delivered notice appear. Watched the typing bubble materialize after a pause that suggested the sender had looked at the message for a moment before responding. Someone I need to talk to you about, tomorrow, if you're willing. She stared at that for a long time. The car turned onto her street. The driver pulled up to her building without her having given the address, and she recognized, distantly, that she should find that more alarming than she did. She looked down at the phone. "Why tomorrow?" she typed. "Because tonight you need to sleep and eat something that isn't a fancy restaurant and get your feet under you. Tomorrow you need to understand what happened tonight and why it's not over." She looked out the window at her building. The buzzing light in the entrance vestibule was visible from here, a yellowish flicker through the glass door. She should say no. She knew that much. She should say no, thank you, good night. I'll figure this out on my own. Whatever it was, she'd figure it out. She looked at the vial in her memory, the way it had rolled across the marble floor and stopped. She typed, "What time?" The response came in less than 10 seconds. "I'll send a car at 9. Don't bring Dana." She exhaled. Didn't ask how he knew Dana's name. Climbed out of the car, stood on the sidewalk in the rain and watched the black car pull away from the curb and disappear around the corner, and stayed there a moment longer than she needed to with her face turned up to the cold, and her eyes closed and the water running down her jaw and into the collar of her old coat. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't finished. She could feel it the same way you feel a storm that hasn't broken yet, in your joints, in the changed pressure of the air, in the particular silence before something very loud. She went inside. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She told herself she would. Stood in the kitchen for 4 minutes staring at the open refrigerator, at the half-empty jar of peanut butter, and the 2 eggs and the leftover rice that had been there since Wednesday, and then closed it without taking anything out. Her stomach felt like it had been wrung out and hung up. Whatever hunger she'd had at the beginning of the evening had been replaced by something that sat heavier and didn't have a name. She changed out of the blouse, hung it carefully because it was the only good one, put on a sweater that was too big and had a small hole near the left cuff, and sat on the edge of her bed with her phone on the mattress beside her and stared at the wall. The wall had a water stain near the ceiling from the upstairs neighbor's bathroom leak 3 winters ago. The landlord had painted over it twice. It kept coming back through. She thought about Preston's face, not the fear, though that had been something she was going to be thinking about for a while. The way fear that complete empties a face out and leaves only the essential architecture of it. She thought about the moment before that, the moment when he'd looked at her across the dinner table and she'd seen, very briefly, the thing underneath the constructed, handsome face. Not malice exactly, something more efficient than malice. Evaluation. The look of someone calculating weight and yield, the same look you'd give a container you were wondering how much it could hold. She thought about the vial. She lay back on the bed with her eyes open and the ceiling above her and thought about what it would have meant if she hadn't texted the wrong number. If she'd texted Dana like she meant to and Dana had called in 12 minutes, not 10, Dana was never punctual, it would have been 12, and Ivy had used the excuse to leave. She would have walked out of Aurelius into the rain and called it a bad date and gone home and poured herself a glass of whatever was in the back of the cabinet and told herself she was too sensitive. Except her wine had been poured while she wasn't watching it, so she wouldn't have gone home. She lay very still with that thought and let it finish arriving. Then she reached over and picked up her phone and looked at the thread again. "I'll send a car at 9. Don't bring Dana." She put the phone face down on the mattress. She didn't sleep for a long time. When she did, it was shallow and full of rooms she couldn't find the exits to. The car arrived at 8:53. She knew because she'd been ready since 8:15, which she refused to examine too closely. She'd washed her face, pulled her hair back the plain way, no ceremony to it, worn jeans and a dark sweater and her least damaged boots. She'd thought about the blouse for a moment and then thought about where she was going and decided against it. She didn't know where she was going. That was the other thing she refused to examine. The driver was different from last night's. Younger, quieter, in a different way. Not professionally blank, but genuinely removed. The look of someone who has decided that whatever happens around him is not his concern. He held the door without making it a gesture. She got in. They went north and then west and then were crossing into lower Manhattan. And she watched the city compress around the car, the buildings taller and closer, the streets reflecting last night's rain in long silver sheets. She'd grown up in New Jersey. She'd moved to the city at 21 for a data analysis job with a firm that had dissolved 8 months later, and she'd stayed because leaving felt like admitting something. She'd been here 3 years and still felt like a tourist in certain neighborhoods. The ones where the money was so old it had stopped looking like money and just looked like everything being correct. Tribeca looked like that. The building Damian's car pulled up to didn't announce itself. No visible signage. Dark glass and steel, and a doorman who stepped forward before the car had fully stopped, as if he'd been watching for it, which he probably had been. She got out. The lobby was the kind of space that made you aware of your footsteps. High ceilings, dark stone floors, the particular silence of a building with excellent soundproofing and no foot traffic below a certain clearance level. There was no front desk. There was a bank of elevators and a man standing near them who wasn't a doorman and wasn't security, but was something in between, and he looked at her and pressed the button without asking who she was. The elevator went to the penthouse. It opened directly into an entry hall, no corridor, and the hall gave way almost immediately to a main room that occupied the entire floor plate of the building and looked out over the Hudson through windows that ran from floor to ceiling on 3 sides. The sky was low and gray, and the river was darker than the sky, and the whole thing together looked like a painting that someone had decided should be approximately twice as large as was reasonable. She stood in the entry and looked at it. "You're early." She turned. Damian was standing near a long kitchen counter at the far end of the space, which she hadn't registered as a kitchen at first because it didn't look like any kitchen she'd been in. It looked like an extension of the room, same stone surfaces, same low light. He was in a dark shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbows, and he was holding a coffee cup and looking at her the same way he'd looked at her last night, directly, with that quality of attention that felt physical. "The car was early," she said. "It was on time." She pulled off her coat, looked for somewhere to put it. He crossed the room and took it from her without making it into anything and laid it over the back of a chair near the entrance. "Coffee?" "Please." He poured it and brought it to her, and she wrapped both hands around the mug and was grateful for the heat. He sat. She sat across from him at the table that occupied one end of the living area. Through the windows behind him, the river moved below. She waited. He looked at his coffee for a moment, then at her. "What do you know about Vincent Carbone?" The name meant nothing. She said so. Damian nodded. "He runs a criminal organization out of South Brooklyn. Has for 20 years, extortion, money laundering, port operations. Most of the revenue runs through legitimate fronts, import businesses, restaurant groups, a couple of property holdings." He paused. 3 of those property holdings overlap with shell companies that have been skimming for my shipping accounts for the past 14 months. She looked at him. "Someone inside your organization?" "Yes. And Preston." "Carbone uses men like Preston to access leverage, not to threaten directly. He's too careful for that. He finds people who are already in proximity to his targets and points them at specific situations." He set his coffee down. "You were Dana's friend." "Dana is seeing a man named Kellerman who works in contract logistics for a firm that handles 2 of my mid-Atlantic port operations." Ivy went very still. "Kellerman has access to routing information," Damian continued. "Not financial records. Routing, ship schedules, container manifests, dock assignments, the kind of information that's worth nothing on its own. But worth something combined with financial access," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She sat back, looked at the river. "You think I have financial access?" she said. "Because I was doing accounting work." "I think Carbone assumed you did, or that you could be persuaded to provide it." "Through a recording," she said. Flat, saying it out loud to finish thinking it. "Through leverage, whatever form it took." She was quiet for a moment. "So I wasn't a coincidence?" "No." "And Dana?" "Dana doesn't know," he said. "Kellerman may not know either. Carbone is careful. He keeps layers between himself and the individual operations." She looked at the table, at her coffee. Her hands around the mug were steady, which surprised her. Something had happened overnight. All the adrenaline and the shock of it had burned off and left something underneath that was harder and more functional. She didn't know yet whether to trust it. "So what do you need from me?" she asked. He was quiet for long enough that she looked up. "I need to know if you can identify the accounts," he said. "The shell companies. If we can trace the skimming source from the financial side while I work the operational side, we close both ends." "You want me to audit your books?" "Yes. She studied him. I'm not a forensic accountant. You built a paper trail from memory in a bar last night, he said, on scratch paper, after a significant amount of adrenaline and a near miss with a drugged drink. She'd forgotten he'd seen that. She'd been going through Preston's behavior in her head on instinct while they were waiting for the car, trying to reconstruct the timeline, and she'd grabbed a cocktail napkin and a pen from her bag and started mapping it out because she couldn't think clearly without externalizing it. She'd forgotten entirely that he was watching her do it. That's different, she said. Is it? She looked at him for a moment, then away. You could hire anyone, she said. I have hired people. They've spent 14 months finding nothing. He paused. And anyone I hire at this point may be connected to whoever's been skimming. The problem with having a compromised operation is that you can't use the operation to investigate itself. So you need an outsider. Yes. One who has no connection to any of it. Yes. One who has reason not to talk. He was quiet. Because I'm connected to it now, whether I want to be or not, she said. Because Carbone pointed Preston at me, which means Carbone's people know my face. Which means I'm not just some stranger who texted the wrong number anymore. He held her gaze. No, he said. You're not. She looked at the river. She thought about Dana. She thought about Kellerman, whom she'd met once, a quiet, careful-seeming man who'd brought flowers to Dana's apartment and asked about her work with the attentiveness of someone gathering information, which Ivy had noted and filed and decided she was being too suspicious. Dana had told her she was too suspicious. She thought about the $87 and the electric company and the medical debt that accrued interest in the background of every financial calculation she made, a permanent low-frequency noise. She thought about the water stain on her ceiling that kept coming back. How long would it take, she said, to trace the accounts? If you're as good as you appear to be, and the trail hasn't been deliberately destroyed, 2 weeks, maybe less. And if the trail has been deliberately destroyed, then longer. She looked back at him. What do I get out of this? Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. It wasn't quite that. More like recalibration, as if he'd expected a different question and was adjusting to this one. The debt, she said. My father's medical bills, $43,000, accruing at 9%. She kept her voice level. I'm not doing this out of civic responsibility, and I'm not doing it out of gratitude. I'm doing it because I apparently don't have a choice about being involved, and if I don't have a choice, then I should at least be paid. Damian looked at her for a long moment. Agreed, he said. She nodded once, picked up her coffee, drank it. He set her up in the office adjacent to the main room, a long walnut-paneled space with a desk that held more surface area than her entire kitchen and a wall of filing cabinets and a laptop that had been placed on the desk in advance of her arrival, which she noted. Someone had known she'd say yes, or had been willing to bet on it. She didn't ask about that. A man named Rourke was introduced as her point of contact within the household. Mid-40s, built with the compact solidity of someone who used to fight professionally, with gray starting at his temples and a broken nose that had healed slightly wrong. He brought her a second coffee without being asked, which she appreciated, and then told her she was free to access any file in the office, and that if she needed anything from the cabinets, she should let him know, because 2 of them were biometrically locked, and he'd need to open them for her. What's in the locked ones? She asked. Personnel files, he said, and operational logs. She looked at him. I'm going to need those. He looked back at her with an expression that said he'd been told to expect this and had his own feelings about it. I'll check with Mr. Morello. Tell him I can't find the skimming source without knowing who had access to the accounts, and I can't know that without the personnel files. Rourke left. She turned to the laptop and started where you always start, which was the oldest record she could find and the clearest baseline she could establish. 14 months of skimming. She needed to know what the accounts had looked like before. She worked for 2 hours without looking up. She was aware of the apartment around her. Sounds from further inside, low voices, a door closing, the particular acoustic of a large space that is occupied in multiple places at once, but it stayed at the periphery. Numbers had always done this to her, created a tunnel that the rest of the world fell back from while she moved through what was in front of her. Her father had called it her superpower when she was 12. Her college roommate had called it unsettling. Both of them had been right. The accounts were clean on the surface, genuinely clean. Not the surface clean of someone who'd done a quick job, but the thorough clean of someone who knew exactly how auditors looked and had put careful effort into meeting every standard, which meant whoever was doing this had accounting knowledge or had hired someone who did. She started mapping the transaction flows in a spreadsheet, building the schema from scratch instead of accepting the existing categorization. If the categorization itself had been manipulated, you wouldn't find anything by working within it. She'd been doing this for about 40 minutes when she noticed the first anomaly. It was tiny, a rounding difference. The kind of thing that happened legitimately a dozen times a day in any large account structure, and the kind of thing that, if it happened in the same account class at the same point in each monthly cycle, meant something other than rounding. She cross-referenced the account class. Checked the cycle timing. There. 14 times in 14 months, with one miss. September, 3 months ago. Every other month, same class, same point in the cycle. Different amounts, different transactions, but the rounding deviation followed the same directional pattern. Someone was using rounding discrepancy as a signal, not to move money, to confirm, to say I'm here, I'm active, the channel is open. She sat back from the laptop. It was a communication method, which meant whoever was running the inside wasn't moving money directly from Damian's accounts. They were coordinating with someone who was, which meant there were at least two people. One inside who had financial access and was using microtransactions as a signal. One outside who was receiving the signal and moving funds through a parallel channel. She closed her eyes briefly. Thought it through. The September miss. 3 months ago. Something had changed 3 months ago, or someone had been absent, or something had happened that interrupted the cycle. One interruption in 14 months. Clean before and after. She pulled up personnel records, the unlocked ones. Cross-referenced anyone who'd been absent or reassigned in September. 3 names. She wrote them down. Then Rourke came back and said Damian would open the personnel files, but he'd need to be present while she accessed them. She said fine. Damian came into the office at noon and stood at the filing cabinet while she worked through the personnel files. She didn't look at him much. She asked questions when she needed information, who reported to whom, what the access levels were, who'd had authorization changes in the past year, and he answered them directly without asking why she needed what she needed. She appreciated that. Most people, when you were trying to follow a thread through their information, wanted to know where the thread was going before you knew yourself. And explaining where you were going before you arrived was how you lost the thread. She got to the September cross-reference. Of the 3 names from her personnel list, one had taken a leave of absence in September. Family matter. Returned in October. Impeccable record before and after. Name was Marcus Hale. She kept her face neutral. What does Marcus Hale do? Damian's voice behind her was immediate. He's my head of financial operations. She absorbed that. How long? 7 years. She said nothing. Closed the file. Opened the next one as if she were simply continuing. She could feel the change in the room without looking. The quality of Damian's silence had shifted. Not in a visible way. Not in a way that made any sound, but there was a different weight to it. What did you find? He said. I don't know yet, she said, which was true. She had a pattern, not a proof. She needed more. Ivy. She turned and looked at him. His face hadn't changed. That was the thing about him. She was starting to understand. His face was consistent in a way that most people's weren't. No micro-expressions leaking information, no flicker of what was moving underneath. Just the amber eyes and the stillness and the waiting, which, she realized, meant that when something did reach his surface, it meant something. It's not confirmed, she said. I need 3 more days on the financial side before I can tell you anything with confidence. He held her gaze. 3 days, he said. Yes. He nodded, turned and walked toward the door. Damian. He stopped. She'd used his name without meaning to. It came out with the same casualness you'd use with someone you'd known a while, and she heard it after the fact and registered it as something she'd have to think about later. The access level needed to run this kind of signal, she said. It's not mid-level access. He didn't move. This person, she said carefully, is very senior, and they're very good. And they've been doing it for over a year, which means they're either confident you won't find it, or they've planned for the possibility that you will. The silence stretched. Why are you telling me this before you have confirmation? He said. She looked at him directly. Because if they've planned for discovery, they may already know I'm here. And if they know I'm here, the next 3 days are going to be a different kind of problem. Something moved through his eyes. He turned back into the room fully, crossed to the desk and stood beside her and looked at the screen she'd been working on, the spreadsheet with its color-coded anomaly map, the pattern of repeating deviations. He stood close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, which she categorized and set aside. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said quietly, "You built this in 3 hours." I had a good baseline. You built this from scratch. She looked at the screen. It's just pattern recognition. The data tells you where to look if you don't assume you already know what you're looking for. He was quiet. Marcus has been with me since before I took over operations, he said. He helped me restructure the financial side when I inherited the business. He paused. He was at my father's funeral. She didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. If it's him, Damian said, it's not about money. She looked at him. What do you mean? Marcus has money. He's been compensated well for 7 years. If he's been running a signal channel for Carbone for 14 months, it's not because he needed cash. She thought about that. What then? His jaw was tight. She watched the muscle of it. That's what I need to find out, he said. He straightened and walked back toward the door. I'm assigning 2 people to this floor for tonight, he said, not turning back. Not because I think you're in immediate danger, because I've been wrong before about what was immediate. She watched him reach the doorway. Damian. He stopped again. She wasn't sure why she said the next thing. It arrived fully formed, and she said it before she decided whether to. You're not going to go talk to Marcus today. The stillness of his back. Why not? He said. Very quiet. Because if you talk to him before I confirm it, and you're wrong, you've lost 7 years of loyalty over a coincidence. And if you're right, you've told him we know, and whatever he's planned for happens before we're ready for it. A long pause. I know that, he said. I know you do, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud. He left. She turned back to the laptop. Her hands, she noticed, were steady. The apartment was quiet around her. The low sounds of occupied rooms, the specific silence of people moving carefully. Outside the windows, the light was failing, the river going dark below the gray sky, the New Jersey shoreline resolving into points of light. She worked through the afternoon. She worked through dinner, which Rourke brought to the office without being asked, something from containers, soup, and bread, better than she would have made herself, and she ate at the desk without tasting much of it. By 8 o'clock, she had confirmed the pattern across 11 of the 14 months. By 9, she had traced the signal structure to a specific account routing that led, through 2 intermediary accounts, to a holding entity registered in Delaware. By 9:40, she had the Delaware entity linked to a property holding in Brooklyn that was registered in the name of a management company. She stared at the name on the screen. The management company. The same one from Damian's files that showed a property overlap with Carbone's shell corporations. So Marcus wasn't just running a signal channel for Carbone. Marcus was Carbone's man. Had been, possibly, from the beginning. From before Damian had restructured. From before he'd inherited operations. From 7 years ago when Marcus had come in close and made himself essential. 7 years. Ivy sat in the empty office with the screens in front of her and the river dark outside, and thought about what it meant to spend 7 years building trust with a person and simultaneously building a channel to destroy them. She stood up, walked to the door, went looking for Damian. She found him in the main room, standing at the windows with his phone at his side, looking out at the water. He heard her coming and turned before she spoke. She looked at him. It's Marcus, she said. And it's not 14 months, it's been longer. I need the original account structures from when he joined, the records from before the restructuring, to know how long. But based on what I can access, the channel has been active since at least the beginning. His face stayed level, but she watched something change behind it. Something that looked, briefly, like the expression of a man who has just had a very specific piece of his past reconstructed in front of him and recognized it and wished he hadn't. "Since before I took over," he said. "Yes." The silence was long. "He helped me build the financial structure," Damian said. "Every account, every routing, every access level. He designed all of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Which means he built in the access from the start. Which means Carbone has had a window into my entire operation for 7 years," she said. He turned back to the window. She stood and let that sit in the room between them. Outside, a boat moved slowly across the darkened Hudson, its running lights leaving small trails in the water. She thought about saying something. She thought about what would be useful and what wouldn't, and mostly, she thought about the fact that this man was standing very still, in the way people stand very still when the stillness is the only thing holding something else back. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. Not much, just enough. He answered it. She watched him listen, watched his jaw set, watched his hand go flat against the glass of the window. "When?" he said. Then, "How many of my people?" He was quiet. Then he turned and looked at Ivy. The expression on his face was not one she'd seen from him before. It was controlled, still, but underneath that control was something cold and absolute and moving fast. "Get your coat," he said. She looked at him. "Carbone just had Marcus Hale killed," he said, "which means Marcus told him we were looking, which means Carbone knows you're here." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ivy stood in the middle of the main room with her pulse doing something wrong in her throat and watched Damian end the call and stand very still for approximately 3 seconds. 3 seconds was a long time. She counted them without meaning to, the way you count things when your brain is trying to create structure around information it doesn't know what to do with. Then he moved. He crossed the room to a panel in the wall she hadn't noticed before, flush with the surface, no visible seam until he pressed a specific point and it opened to reveal a narrow console with monitors, a keypad, a phone, handset. He hit 3 keys in sequence. Somewhere in the apartment something shifted. She felt it more than heard it, a low mechanical sound followed by a change in the quality of the silence. The windows, she realized. The glass had changed opacity slightly, going a shade darker. "Rourke," he said, not raising his voice. Rourke appeared from the hallway in under 10 seconds. He was already wearing a jacket, which meant he'd been listening, or he'd been informed, or both. "Northeast stairwell," Damian said. "Get Chen and have him sweep the roof access. I want eyes on the building across the street, the parking structure." Rourke was already moving. Damian turned back to Ivy. She looked at him and thought about the sentence he hadn't finished. "Carbone knows you're—" "He knows I'm here," she said. "In this building." "Yes." "How?" He picked up her coat from the chair where he'd put it that morning and handed it to her. "Marcus knew where I brought you last night. He had access to vehicle logs." She put the coat on. Her hands were moving. She noticed that her hands were moving fine, steady, and some distant part of her filed that away as information about herself she hadn't had before. That apparently this was what she was like in actual danger. Not the trembling in the restaurant, not the unsteady knees on the sidewalk in the rain, but this, clear, functional, moving. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Carbone doesn't have in his records," he paused, "because Marcus didn't know about it." She thought about what that meant. A place he'd kept off the books, outside the operational structure that Marcus had helped build. A place designed to not exist in anyone's information. "How many places like that do you have?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Enough." They went down through a service corridor that ran parallel to the main elevator bank, accessed through a door in the back of a utility room that had a different lock from everything else in the apartment. Mechanical, not biometric, a physical key that Damian kept on his person. The corridor was concrete and low lighting and smelled of old air and cable insulation, and Ivy followed him through it without talking because there was nothing to say that mattered more than moving quickly. At the end of the corridor was a freight elevator. They went down 12 floors below street level. Sub-basement. She hadn't known the building had a sub-basement. A car was waiting, not one of the black sedans from before, a dark gray SUV with plates she didn't try to read, engine already running, a driver behind the wheel she hadn't seen before. Damian opened the back door and she got in, and he got in behind her, and before the door closed, they were moving. She didn't ask where they were going. She looked out the window and watched the underground structure give way to a service road that connected to a cross street 2 blocks from the building's front entrance. Anyone watching the front would have seen nothing leave. Damian was on his phone beside her. She caught fragments. Names she didn't know, something about a location in Red Hook, something about 40 minutes. His voice stayed even throughout. No elevation in register, no urgency in the pacing. The calm of it was its own kind of unnerving. Not the calm of someone unaffected, but the calm of someone who has been in enough situations like this that effect no longer changes the voice. She thought about Marcus Hale. She thought about a man who'd spent 7 years in the orbit of Damian Morello, who'd eaten at his table, presumably, who'd been trusted with the architecture of his entire financial life, and had been running a channel for his enemy the entire time. And then, when discovery got too close, had told Carbone. And Carbone had killed him. Did they kill him because he told them about me, she said, or to keep him from being used against them? Damian lowered the phone and looked at her. Both, he said. She nodded, looked back at the window. They were on a bridge now. She could see water on both sides, the lights of the city smearing in the wet air. Carbone knew Marcus's value was finished, she said. The moment Marcus made contact to warn him, Marcus became a liability instead of an asset. Because if you caught Marcus, Marcus could trade information. Yes. So Carbone removed the liability. Yes. She thought about that. He's been planning for this, she said. Not just the contingency. The whole sequence. He knew eventually you'd find the skimming. He let it run long enough to accomplish whatever it was accomplishing, and he had an exit built in. Marcus's death is the exit. Clean the channel, remove the witness, and whatever the skimming was actually doing is already done. Damian was very still beside her. Say that last part again, he said. She looked at him. Whatever the skimming was actually doing, I said I traced the signal channel, sir, but I traced it to a Delaware holding entity that linked to a Brooklyn property. I didn't have time to trace what that property connected to, what it was used for. She paused. The money movement was too small to be the goal. The amounts were insignificant relative to your operational revenue, which means the financial channel wasn't the point. It was the mechanism. For what? She thought about the account structures Marcus had built, the access levels, the routing she'd been mapping. I don't know yet, she said, but I need to get back into the records. We'll have secure access within the hour. The car moved through Red Hook's industrial streets, warehouses, chain link, the particular blankness of a neighborhood that gets used rather than inhabited, and pulled into the loading bay of a building that looked from outside like a refrigeration facility. Inside it was something else entirely. 2 floors of reinforced structure, generators, server racks, 4 men who appeared from positions she couldn't entirely track, a kitchen, 3 separate rooms with locked doors, and a main space that had the organized, equipment-dense feel of a place designed for extended occupation. A second location. Off every record Marcus had touched. She took the laptop she was given and got to work. She found it 40 minutes later. She sat with it for a moment before she said anything. She wanted to be sure. She pulled the thread 3 different ways, approached the conclusion from 3 different directions, and arrived at the same place each time. Then she called Damian into the room. He came in and stood behind her. She angled the screen so he could see and walked him through it. The routing structure, the Delaware entity, the Brooklyn property, the connection she'd found when she dug into what the Brooklyn property actually was. The property was a logistics warehouse, commercial. It handled cargo transfers, goods moving between port facilities and final distribution destinations. On paper, it was clean. Legitimate business, appropriate licensing, clean tax filings. It was also directly adjacent to the loading infrastructure for one of Damian's primary port operations. The signal channel wasn't just confirming money movement, she said. It was confirming timing, ship schedules, container routing, dock assignments. She looked up at him. Kellerman's information combined with Marcus's internal access, Carbone has had advance notice of every significant cargo movement through your port operations for at least 14 months. Damian's face showed nothing. That's how he's been undercutting your contracts, she said. He's not competing for them. He's been knowing in advance what you're moving and when, and he's been positioning parallel operations to service the same clients with lower quotes, because he knows your pricing before you finalize it. He's been inside my operations, Damian said. Not financially, operationally. Yes, the skimming was a side effect, or maybe deliberate misdirection, something visible enough that if you ever got close, you'd focus on the financial irregularity and miss what the channel was actually for. She watched him take that in. The silence in the room was a specific kind. Not the silence before speech, but the silence before decision. The kind that comes after the map has changed and someone is reorienting. How much has he taken? Damian said. In contracts redirected? I can't calculate that without your client records. But based on the volume of information moving through the channel, she stopped. Damian, he's been doing this for 14 months that I can confirm, but Marcus has been inside for 7 years. If the channel predates what I can see, he's had 7 years of advanced operational intelligence. Yes. Another silence. His jaw moved. Once, like something being controlled. Carbone's warehouse, he said. The Brooklyn property. What about it? It opened, he said slowly, 8 years ago. 1 year before Marcus came to work for me. She felt the full shape of it arrive at once. He was already Carbone's man when you hired him, she said. He wasn't hired, Damian said. He came recommended. By an operations consultant we used for the transition. Someone I trusted. He paused. Someone who is no longer in this business. She thought about what that meant for a moment, then decided she didn't need to think about it further right now. The consultant, she said. His name was Gerard Falk. He died 4 years ago. Heart failure. His voice was flat, communicating nothing about whether he believed that. She looked back at the screen. 7 years. The entirety of Damian's operation as its current form, built on a foundation that Carbone had laid in advance, through a man who had been there from before the first day, who had helped construct every system and then built the means to read every system directly into the construction. He didn't just compromise your operation, she said quietly. He built your operation for Carbone. From the inside out. The quality of the room changed. She heard Damian step back from the desk. She didn't turn around. She listened to him cross toward the far wall and stop. She gave it a moment. Then she said, The contract's Carbone redirected. How significant? Significant, Damian said from behind her. Enough to change the balance of the East Coast operation. Enough to explain, he said slowly, why the last 2 years have been harder than they should have been. Why I've been losing bids I should have been winning. Why 3 major clients moved to other logistics providers, and the explanations never fully made sense. He stopped. I thought I was being outmaneuvered. I spent 2 years trying to identify where my operational model was failing. It wasn't failing, she said. No. Someone was reading your hand. Yes. She turned in the chair and looked at him. He was standing at the far wall with his back to her and his arms at his sides, and the line of his shoulders told her everything his face wouldn't. She'd spent 2 days learning the vocabulary of what he let reach the surface, and she could read it now. The controlled stillness when he was managing something large, the specific quality of this stillness, which was different, which was the stillness of a man who has just had the floor removed and is working out where to put his weight. 7 years. She tried to imagine it. The man at the funeral. The man who'd helped rebuild after the inheritance. The man who'd sat in meetings and reviewed routing decisions and signed off on account structures and done all of it with a second conversation running underneath, a parallel channel reporting everything back. Rourke, she said. He turned. Does Rourke know about this place? Yes. How long has Rourke been with you? Something moved through his face, fast and controlled. 9 years, he said. And Marcus joined 7 years ago. Rourke predates Marcus. That's not... She stopped, tried to say it right. If Carbone built this from the beginning and Marcus was embedded at the restructuring, Then I need to know who else came in around the same time. Not because I'm accusing anyone, because Carbone doesn't plant one asset. He plants redundancy. Damian looked at her for a long moment. Then he took out his phone and made a call and spoke for about 30 seconds in a low, precise voice, and ended it. I've asked Rourke to compile a list, he said. Everyone who joined within 18 months of Marcus. Thank you. He crossed back to the desk and stood looking at the screen again. She watched him study the account structures, the routing maps, the chain of connection she'd built across the last several hours. You built all of this tonight, he said. Most of it. In under 3 hours. She looked at the screen. The structure was already there. I just followed it. He was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell me about the September miss immediately, he said. When you first found it. She looked up at him. Because I wasn't sure yet, she said. And because you would have gone to Marcus. I said I knew that. You said you knew you shouldn't. That's different from being certain you wouldn't. He held her gaze. You don't trust me, he said. I trust you with some things, she said. I trust your competence. I trust that you're motivated by genuine interest in finding this. I don't yet trust what you do when it's personal. Fair, he said. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected resistance, or at least the performance of it. He pulled the chair from the corner of the room, spun it around and sat on it backwards with his arms resting across the back, and looked at the screen the way someone looks at something they're trying to decide the weight of. What's next? He said. Not a question exactly. The Brooklyn warehouse, she said. It's the hub. Everything routes through it. The intelligence channel, probably some of the contract redirection, possibly physical operations I haven't identified yet. If Carbone knows we're looking, he's either going to sanitize that location or move to use it before we can get to it. He won't sanitize it, Damian said. It's too valuable, and it's been clean for 8 years. He'll believe it's still clean. So he moves. Yes. What does moving look like for him? Damian was quiet for a moment. He accelerates. Whatever the end goal was, whatever the 7 years of intelligence was building toward, he stops waiting for the right moment and creates the moment. She thought about that. What was he building toward, she said. My ports, Damian said simply. The entire East Coast operation. He's been positioning to take it, not through violence, through attrition. Enough contract loss, enough financial pressure, enough operational weakness, and I'm forced to liquidate or restructure. At which point his organizations move in to acquire the infrastructure. She absorbed that. A hostile takeover, she said, of a criminal empire. It's not as different from legitimate business as people assume. She looked at the screen. Then he already has most of what he needs, she said. The intelligence has been running for 14 months confirmed, possibly 7 years total. The contract redirection has been weakening your position. Marcus is gone, cleaned up. The channel is closed. She paused. He doesn't need to wait anymore. The attrition plan has done its work. Whatever he does next doesn't need to be subtle. The room was quiet. From somewhere outside, distant, the sound traveling oddly through the industrial structure, a sound, low, like a vehicle moving slowly over debris. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Rourke appeared in the doorway. His face was the compressed, deliberate neutrality of a man working hard not to communicate something before he'd spoken it aloud. I have the list, he said. 18 people joined within the timeline you specified. He paused. One of them was reassigned to building security 3 weeks ago, on Marcus's recommendation. Damian looked at Rourke steadily. Which building? He said. Rourke's jaw moved. This one, he said. The generators hummed. The server racks pulsed with blue indicator light. Somewhere in the structure above them, behind the concrete and the steel and the carefully unlisted address, someone who had been put here 3 weeks ago on a dead man's recommendation was doing something in the dark. Ivy stood up from the desk. She didn't think about standing up. Her body simply decided. She looked at Damian. He was already looking at her. And for the first time since the restaurant, since the rain, since Stay Where You Are, she saw something in his face that was not controlled, not managed, not held behind the stillness. He was afraid, not for himself. He reached out and took her arm. Not roughly. Not with urgency that looked like aggression, but with the grip of someone who has made a decision and is not willing to negotiate about it, and said quietly and without anything in his voice except absolute certainty, "Whatever happens in the next 60 seconds, you stay behind me." And then every light in the building went out at once, total darkness. Not the darkness of a room with curtains drawn or a hallway with a burned bulb. The darkness of a space that has been deliberately blinded, generators cut, emergency lighting bypassed, every indicator light on every server rack gone simultaneously. The kind of darkness that has intent behind it. Ivy heard her own breath. She heard Damian move, one step, two, fast and certain, and his hand found her arm in the dark with the accuracy of someone who had counted distances before the lights went out. He pulled her sideways. Her shoulder connected with something, a cabinet edge, hard, and she bit down on the sound it wanted to make. From above them, footsteps. Not one set, multiple. Moving with the particular cadence of people who know where they're going in the dark because they've mapped it in advance. "Down," Damian said against her ear. One word, breath, barely. She went down. Knees on concrete. She felt him go down beside her and felt the displacement of air as he moved past her toward the desk and heard a drawer open. Not fumbling, direct, and close. Then his hand was at her wrist again, pulling her forward, and she followed. She couldn't see anything. She kept one hand out in front of her and followed the pressure of his grip and moved as fast as she could move without making noise. The concrete floor was cold through the knees of her jeans from the 2 seconds she'd been on it, and she thought about that, the cold of it, because her brain was doing the thing it did where it found the most concrete sensory detail available and fixed on it to keep from going sideways. A sound from the left, close. Damian stopped. She stopped behind him and pressed herself against what felt like the server rack and made her breathing small. Silence. Then a voice, low, professional, speaking into a radio. She caught second floor clear and moving to operations, and then it faded as whoever it was moved away toward the far end of the space. They were doing a sweep, methodical, room by room, which meant they had numbers enough to do it properly, and they'd done something to the building's security man first, and they'd had the layout in advance because Marcus's asset had been in the building for 3 weeks and had walked every room and filed every door and every corridor in his memory for exactly this. Damian moved again. She followed. They went through a door she hadn't used before. She felt the door frame and then different air, slightly warmer, and the sound changed. A narrower space. The concrete walls closer. Some kind of utility corridor running behind the main room. Damian stopped and pulled her in close and spoke against her ear so quietly she felt the words more than heard them. "There's an exit at the end of this corridor, 30 meters, leads to the loading bay." "Rourke," she breathed. "I don't know where Rourke is." She absorbed that. "How many are up there?" "I counted 4 sets of footsteps. Could be more." She thought about the sweep pattern. The voice on the radio, 2 positions minimum, communicating. 4 people in a building this size doing rooms meant they had the exits covered too. "The loading bay exit," she said. "Yes. They'll have it covered." "Probably." She felt him shift. Something in the way he moved changed. The quality of his stillness when he was managing something became something else, became the kinetic stillness of something about to move rather than something holding position. "I have one option," he said. "Tell me." A pause. "There's a breaker panel 15 meters to our right. If I can get to it before they finish the sweep of the main room, I can restore partial power. Just the loading bay circuit. Lights on out there, not in here. Anyone covering the exit is suddenly lit from behind." "That's not much of an advantage." "No," he said. "It's not." She heard what he wasn't saying. It was the only advantage available. They were going to use it anyway. "Go," she said. He hesitated for exactly 1 second. She felt it, the fraction of time where something in him considered whether to say something and decided against it. Then he moved. She stayed against the wall and listened. She counted. She counted his footsteps until they disappeared, then counted the other sounds. The sweep moving through the main room, the muffled radio exchanges, the particular silence of the corridor around her, which was not empty silence but occupied silence, the kind with held breath in it. She thought about the loading bay, about men positioned outside a door, lit from behind, no cover, about Damian going out first because that was what he would do, what the logic of it required. She thought about the bronze sculpture in the original outline she'd been told. The detail Dana had mentioned once, absurdly, when describing one of the stories she found in crime columns. Woman throws something, misses entirely, causes sufficient collateral disaster by accident. She thought about what she had in her hands. Nothing. She thought about what was around her in the corridor. She couldn't see it. She reached out carefully with one hand and felt along the wall. Concrete, a pipe running horizontally, something mounted to the wall at shoulder height. She traced it. A box. Metal. She felt the latch. She opened it slowly. Her fingers found the interior. Breakers. She was at a secondary panel, a smaller one. Not the main one Damian was going for, but a distribution panel. She felt the rows of switches, the labeled slots she couldn't read. She thought about what circuits would run off a secondary distribution panel in a secondary corridor. She picked one, flipped it. Somewhere above them, a fire suppression alarm began screaming. The sound was enormous. It filled the building like a physical thing, a high, repeating shriek that bounced off concrete and steel and multiplied. She heard voices above her suddenly rapid and not low anymore, not professional and controlled but reactive, people talking over each other. She moved. She went down the corridor toward where Damian had gone, hand on the wall, moving fast and not quiet anymore because quiet didn't matter now. The alarm was covering everything. She found him at the breaker panel. She almost ran into him, and he caught her with one arm, and she felt his breath against the top of her head, fast. "That was you," he said. "Suppression alarm," she said. "Gives us maybe 90 seconds before they reset it and figure out it's not real." His grip on her arm tightened once. Not pulling, just the pressure of acknowledgement. "Loading bay," he said. They ran. The corridor opened into a secondary space. She could feel the ceiling go higher. And then a door, and Damian hit it with his shoulder, and it opened, and they came out into the loading bay. The bay was lit. One set of overhead fluorescents, flickering. Two large rolling doors facing the exterior, both closed. And two men, she registered them at almost the same moment they registered her and Damian, positioned on either side of the bay, weapons up, backlit by the fluorescents, which was exactly the problem Damian had anticipated. Damian moved before she'd finished processing the scene. He went left and low and fast, yet not toward the men, she noticed, not directly, toward the cover of a metal shelving unit that stood between the door and the left position. She heard the shot. It was louder than she'd imagined, louder than movies or television or anything that had prepared her for the actual physical fact of a gun firing in an enclosed concrete space. It was a pressure change as much as a sound. It missed. The man on the right swung toward Damian's movement, and in doing so put his back partially toward Ivy. She picked up the only thing within reach, a length of heavy chain coiled on a hook mounted to the wall beside the door, the kind used for securing rolling loads, and threw it. Her aim was genuinely not good. She was aiming at the man's weapon arm. She got the man's legs. The chain wrapped around his shins and he went down hard, both knees, and the weapon hit the concrete and skidded, and she was already moving toward where it had skidded, and she got there before he recovered and kicked it further across the floor because she was not going to pick it up. She had no idea how to use it. She just needed it not to be in his hand. On the left side of the bay, Damian and the first man were in contact. She heard it more than saw it. The particular sounds of a struggle that's fast and brutal and not choreographed. Something hit metal. Someone exhaled hard. The man on the floor grabbed her ankle. She went down on one knee and his grip pulled at her boot, and she turned and drove her elbow into the side of his head with everything she had in that arm, which was not very much, which was apparently enough. His grip loosened. She wrenched free. She got to her feet. The left side of the bay had gone quiet. She turned. Damian was standing. The other man was not. He crossed to her in 3 steps, and she saw the cut above his left eyebrow. Something had connected up there, a bright thin line of blood already working down toward his eye. He didn't seem to register it. He looked at her. Her knee, which she'd hit on the concrete, her elbow, her face. "Okay?" he said. She pulled in a breath. "Yes." "You threw a chain at him." I threw it at his arm, she said. I missed. You hit his legs. I'm aware. His mouth moved, the same way it had moved once before, in the restaurant. Not quite a smile, something contained and real, and not performing anything. Rolling door, he said. They went. Outside was cold air and wet pavement, and the sound of the alarm still going inside, and a street that was, blessedly, empty of visible threat. The black SUV was gone from the bay entrance. Their driver had moved it, or it had been moved for them, she didn't know. But there was a vehicle she didn't recognize parked at the far end of the loading area, and the driver's door opened and a man got out. Rourke. She exhaled. He had blood on his jacket from something she wasn't going to ask about right now, and he moved with the slightly deliberate gait of someone managing pain they've decided not to acknowledge. He looked at Damian, at Ivy. Back at Damian. How many inside? Damian said. I counted 6 coming in, got 2 in the stairwell. He paused. Chen's down. Building security. The one Marcus placed. Got to him before we identified him. The sentence landed. Ivy watched Damian take it. The way he did it. The slight adjustment in his stance. The thing that passed behind his eyes and got controlled before it reached his face. Is he? Hospital, Rourke said. He's breathing. A muscle in Damian's jaw. The 4 inside. Building's compromised. We need to not be here. Agreed. They moved to the vehicle. Rourke drove. Damian got in the front, Ivy in the back. The vehicle cleared the loading area and turned into a side street and then into traffic that was thin and late night and unremarkable. She leaned her head back against the seat. Her knee was developing an opinion about what she'd done to it. Her elbow was worse. She pressed her arm against her side and breathed and looked at the passing city through the window. She thought about Chen, someone she hadn't spoken to, whose face she'd registered in the secondary safe house as one of the 4 men who'd appeared from positions she couldn't track. Someone who'd been there when she arrived and was now in a hospital because the man Marcus had placed there had known him by name, probably, had worked alongside him for 3 weeks on a dead man's word. The city moved past the window. The lights did what they always did, smeared in the wet, the reflections pulling long across the asphalt. She thought about Carbone, not the operation, the man. She'd been thinking about the structure of what he'd built, the architecture of it, the patience, the 7 years. And she'd been thinking about it as a system, the way she thought about account structures, the way she mapped flow and logic. But a system is built by a person who made decisions, and the decisions said something about what the person thought. He thought Damian could be taken apart from the inside. He'd spent 7 years proving he was right. And he'd been right, she thought. He had been right. The skimming, the contract redirection, the operational intelligence. Damian's empire was weaker than it should have been, had been hemorrhaging strength for years without knowing why. Carbone hadn't needed to be violent about it because he'd been winning without violence. Until she'd texted the wrong number. She thought about that. The single wrong digit. The chain of events from it. Carbone had been winning. And then a woman with $87 and a dead man's debt had accidentally made contact with the one person positioned to look at the right accounts in the right way, and the whole architecture had become visible. He would not accept that. A man who builds for 7 years does not accept an accidental disruption to the plan. He would be furious. And a furious man with his resources, his infrastructure, his history of long planning, he doesn't retreat when the plan is disrupted. He accelerates the end. He's going to move on the ports, she said. Rourke glanced in the rearview mirror. Damian turned. Tonight, she said, or in the next 12 to 24 hours. He tried to take us out of the picture and it didn't work, which means he knows the accounting trail is compromised. He can't continue the gradual attrition plan because we've seen it, so he skips to the end. What does the end look like? Rourke said. She looked at Damian. What would collapse your port operations fastest? She said. Not financial pressure, physical. His eyes were steady on her. The Newark facility, he said. It's the hub of the mid-Atlantic routing. 3 other facilities route through it. If the Newark operation goes down, the others are isolated. It takes months to rebuild the routing infrastructure. What does goes down mean? It could mean a lot of things, he said. Federal seizure on planted evidence, a fire, physical occupation, putting Carbone's people in control of the facility, directly. Federal seizure, Ivy said. That's what the financial channel was for, not the contract redirection. That was a bonus. The main purpose was building a paper trail that looked like money laundering. She watched him understand it. The account routing I traced, she said, her voice fast now because the logic was arriving all at once and she needed to keep up with it. The Delaware entity, the Brooklyn warehouse, those aren't just relay points for intelligence. They're constructed to look, if you audit them from the outside, like money moving from your accounts through shell companies into criminal holdings. Damian said nothing. Marcus built you a financial structure that operates clean, she said, but can be reread with the right additional documentation as a laundering operation. Carbone has the documentation. He's had 7 years to build it. She stopped. He was never going to take the ports by force. He was going to hand federal investigators a complete package, account records, transaction logs, routing documentation, and let them do it. The vehicle was quiet. Rourke made a turn. The highway appeared and the city dropped behind them. The package, Damian said. His voice had the flatness of someone doing calculation. If he submits it now, before we can counter-document, before we can contextualize what the records actually show, then everything I've spent 7 years building gets seized pending investigation, he said. And while it's frozen, Carbone's people move into the operational vacuum. Yes, the flatness in his voice was something below anger, something more structural than anger. She recognized it distantly as the way someone sounds when they've understood the full scope of a thing and are deciding what to do with the understanding. How long do we have? Rourke said. If he's accelerating because tonight failed, and he is, he files within the day, Ivy said. Probably less. He'll want to move before Damian can get ahead of it. Can we counter-document? Damian said. The records you have, the actual transaction history. I can build a counter-narrative, she said. A complete one. I need the original account records, everything Marcus had access to from before the restructuring. And I need time. She paused. 6 hours, minimum. Probably 8. Carbone filed. It's done, Rourke said. We can't uncorrupt an investigation. No, she said, but we can change what they find when they look. She looked at Damian. I need to rebuild the account documentation from the ground up. Present the same records in their actual context. Every transaction in sequence, every routing explained by legitimate operational purpose, the shell company connections dismantled through cross-referencing the real source documentation. She stopped. I can make the case, but I need access to everything, including the records Marcus helped build. Damian was looking at her with the expression she was starting to know, the one where he was deciding something, and the decision had already been made, and he was simply completing the formality of making it consciously. We have a secure facility in Jersey, he said, an hour out. Then we go, she said. She turned to look back through the rear window. The Red Hook facility was invisible now, absorbed into the city's spread of light. Somewhere in it, 4 men were doing whatever they did when an operation failed and the target was already gone. Somewhere in Brooklyn, in a warehouse that had been clean for 8 years, Carbone was making decisions about timing. She turned back. Her knee was loud with pain now, and she pressed her palm against it, the pressure helping marginally. Her elbow had stiffened. She could feel the concrete on her palm from the loading bay floor. A light abrasion, nothing serious, but present, a fact her body was insisting on. She looked at the back of Damian's head. The cut above his eye had dried to a dark line. Your eye, she said. He reached up and touched it, looked at his fingers. It's fine, he said. It should be cleaned. Later. She looked at the road ahead. The highway, the city lights going amber and distant in the side mirrors, the dark stretching forward. 8 hours. She thought about what 8 hours of documentation work looked like. She'd done marathon sessions before, during the hospital accounting job, during the audits at the end of fiscal years when everything had to be right and the margin for error was nothing. She'd sat in fluorescent-lit offices for 12, 14 hours and come out the other side with something that held. This was different. This was 8 hours to build a legal counter-narrative against 7 years of manufactured evidence, in a facility she'd never been to, with records she hadn't fully seen, with Carbone's timeline running parallel. She thought about the $87. about the electric company, about the water stain on the ceiling of her apartment that kept coming back through the paint, about her father's hands at the end, how careful they'd looked, how tired. She pressed her palm harder against her knee and breathed. She was going to build this. She was going to build it clean and complete and airtight. And when the federal investigators pulled the account records, what they were going to find was not a laundering operation. They were going to find exactly what it actually was, which was a man whose trusted financial architect had embedded a parasite into his own operation and pointed it at him for 7 years on someone else's payroll. She was going to turn Carbone's evidence against itself. She was going to do it in 8 hours on a bad knee in a facility in New Jersey. She looked at the highway and set her jaw and started composing the structure in her head. An hour later, the vehicle turned off the highway onto a county road and then onto a gravel access road that led through a stand of trees to a low building. Single story, no visible signage, floodlights that came on as the vehicle approached and illuminated a man at the door who recognized Rourke and stepped aside. Inside, clean, quiet. A long table, good lighting, 2 laptops already open, a printer. Someone had called ahead. The original account records, physical files, banker's boxes, stacked on a second table, had been transported from a document storage location she wasn't going to ask about. She sat down, opened the first box, and Damian, who sat in the chair to her left and said nothing, put a coffee in front of her at some point in the next 10 minutes without being asked. And when she looked at him in brief, involuntary acknowledgement, she saw the cut above his eye and the dried blood and the amber gaze fixed on the stack of files in front of her with the specific focused quality of a man who has placed something important in the hands of another person and is sitting with the full weight of that decision. She looked back at the files. She started. 3 hours in, she found the falsified documentation. Not the channel, not the routing. The actual forged files that Carbone had been building in parallel. She found them because Marcus, meticulous as he was, had cross-referenced them in the same system as the legitimate records, and the cross-reference timestamps didn't match the document creation dates. He'd built the evidence package over several years, updating it as the operation evolved. It was thorough. It was convincing. And it had one flaw. A single temporal inconsistency in the metadata that only existed because she was looking at both the real records and the constructed ones simultaneously. She pulled the thread. She found 19 falsified documents, each one with the same flaw, off by between 4 and 11 days in the creation metadata versus the cross-reference log dates. Not enough to be obvious, exactly enough with the real records beside them to prove construction. She looked up. Damian was watching her. "I can destroy this," she said. He was still. "The falsified package," she said. "I can build a complete counter-documentation that proves each forged file was created after the events it claims to document. The metadata discrepancy is consistent across all 19 files, which means it can't be explained as error. It can only be explained as construction." His jaw was tight. "How long?" 3 more hours, she said. "Maybe less." He looked at her for a long moment. "Do it," he said. She turned back. She was 40 minutes into the counter documentation when her phone buzzed. She'd forgotten she had it. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, different from the 212 that had become Damian's thread. Area code 347. Brooklyn. She answered it. Silence for a moment. Then a voice. Male, older, with the particular quality of someone who chooses his words with the care of a man who has learned that words are a form of violence when deployed correctly. "Miss Callahan," the voice said, "I think we should have a conversation before you finish whatever it is you're building." Her chest went cold. She looked at Damian. He was already looking at her, reading her face, which was apparently something she was going to have to work on. She pressed the phone to her shoulder. "It's Carbone," she said. The room went the particular quiet of a space where everyone has stopped breathing at. The room held its breath. Ivy kept the phone pressed against her shoulder and looked at Damian, and the 3 seconds that passed between them carried more information than most conversations she'd had in the past year. He looked at the phone, at her face, back at the phone. Then he gave one slow, deliberate nod. She put it back to her ear. "Mr. Carbone," she said. Her voice came out level. She was almost surprised by that. You found the metadata, Carbone said. Not a question, the tone of a man confirming something he'd already calculated. I expected you would. Marcus said you were fast. Marcus is dead, she said. A brief pause. Yes, that was unfortunate. He was useful for a long time. Another pause, almost contemplative. You understand that I didn't want that. I understand that you did it anyway. These things have their own momentum, he said. Once a certain sequence begins, the sequence has requirements. Marcus understood that. He accepted it, I think, better than you might expect. She looked at the table in front of her, at the open files, the counter-documentation she'd built to the 40-minute mark, the 19 falsified records with their exposed timestamps laid beside their legitimate counterparts. What do you want? She said. The same thing I've always wanted, he said. The Newark facility, 3 of the Mid-Atlantic port contracts, and the Delaware routing infrastructure. I'll take that in the form of a transfer agreement rather than a seizure, which is considerably more dignified for everyone. A pause. I'm willing to let the rest of Mr. Morello's operation continue. I'm not interested in total destruction. I'm interested in what's mine by right of investment. Those things aren't yours. They will be, he said, in approximately 4 hours when the documentation package arrives at the field office of the appropriate federal agency. Unless you choose an alternative. She looked at Damian. He was watching her face and reading it, and she knew he was reading it because he'd told her, in the indirect way he told her things, that her face communicated more than she knew. What alternative? She said. Stop what you're building, Carbone said. Walk away from the facility you're currently in. I know where it is, Miss Callahan. Marcus was thorough. And allow the natural conclusion of 7 years of work to proceed without interference. In exchange, the documentation I hold on you personally, the financial connection I've constructed between your father's medical debt resolution and a series of accounts that appear to belong to Mr. Morello's organization, disappears. The cold in her chest became something specific. What documentation? She said. Over the past 48 hours, he said, with the patience of a man who prepared this particular sentence in advance, a series of transfers totaling approximately $43,000 moved from accounts connected to Blackthorn Global Holdings into a personal account in your name. The transfers are dated and logged. The account is real. I'd imagine the balance is quite a surprise to you. She said nothing. You're currently in a facility owned by a man under federal investigation, Carbone continued. You've been inside his primary residence. You've accessed his financial records. You've participated in the removal of evidence from a compromised building in Red Hook. The documentation I hold on you doesn't require fabrication, Miss Callahan. It simply requires framing. She looked at the files in front of her. $43,000. Her father's debt, to the dollar. Moved into an account in her name without her knowledge. Evidence of exactly the financial connection Carbone needed to make her complicit in whatever the federal case became. He'd done it in the last 48 hours. Since the restaurant. Since the moment she'd become visible. You built a backup, she said. I build several of everything, he said. It's how things last. The room was very quiet around her. She was aware of Rourke near the door, of the low hum of the laptop cooling fans, of Damian beside her with his hands flat on the table and his jaw tight and his eyes on the side of her face. You need me to stop, she said. I need the interference to stop, he said. I'm indifferent to what you do afterward. Leave the city. Go back to Queens. The account in your name, if you walk away tonight, remains dormant, undiscovered. You carry on your life with your debt resolved and a clean record and no further involvement in affairs that were not yours to begin with. She heard the shape of it, the elegant mechanics of it, the offer that wasn't an offer, but a demonstration. This is how thoroughly I've prepared. This is what you're standing inside without knowing it. This is the room I built around you while you were building something against me. And if I don't walk away, she said, then I submit the full package, he said, yours alongside Mr. Morello's, and whatever happens to him, which will be considerable, you share. Silence. Think carefully, Carbone said. You came into this by accident, a wrong number, that's all it was. You don't owe this man anything that costs you your freedom. She looked at the table. She looked at the 19 falsified files, at the metadata discrepancies she'd found, the single consistent flaw across all of them, the thread that unraveled the whole package if you pulled it correctly. She looked at the counter-documentation she'd built, 40 minutes of it, structured, thorough, already pointing toward the conclusion that would make the federal case collapse. She thought about what 3 more hours of work would produce. She thought about the account in her name with $43,000 in it, sitting there like a trap that had already closed. She thought about her father, his hands at the end. How tired. She looked at Damian. He was looking back at her, not urging, not asking, not doing any of the things a man in his position might do. Pressure her, signal her, make the decision for her in the way that powerful men make decisions for people they've decided they're protecting. He was just looking at her with those amber eyes and the dried blood above his left eye, and the particular expression she'd been learning to read, which was not an expression of waiting, but an expression of accepting whatever was about to be said. She put the phone back to her ear. "No," she said. A pause. "Miss Callahan, I heard the offer," she said. "The answer is no." She ended the call. She put the phone on the table face down. She picked up her pen. "He has documentation connecting me to your accounts," she said, not looking at Damian. 43,000 transferred into my name in the last 48 hours. He'll submit it with the rest of the package if I don't stop." Damian was silent for a moment. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "I found the transfer this morning," he said. "I was trying to determine how to tell you." She held his gaze. "How?" she said. "The same way he moves everything," Damian said. "Through intermediary accounts that surface trace back to my holdings. I couldn't reverse it without triggering a flag that would make it more visible, not less." He paused. "I'm sorry, he moved faster than I anticipated." She looked back at the files. She thought about being angry. She checked for it, the way you check a wound, pressing the edges to see what's there. Some of it was there, not all of it. "If I finish this," she said, "and the counter-documentation holds, the federal case collapses. Which means the constructed evidence against me collapses with it." "Yes." "And if it doesn't hold—" "It will hold," he said. She looked at him. "You don't know that," she said. "I know what you've built in the last 3 hours," he said. "I've been watching you build it." She looked at the files again. She looked at the metadata comparison table she'd built, at the 19 documents laid in 2 columns, original and falsified, with the timestamp discrepancies highlighted. Clean, rigorous, documented with the source materials beside each entry. She picked up the pen. "Then let me finish," she said. She worked for 3 more hours without stopping. Rourke brought coffee twice and food once, something in a wrapper that she unwrapped and ate without tasting. Damian stayed at the table. He didn't talk. He didn't ask questions. He read through the files she'd already processed, holding each one with the attention of a man encountering the history of his own operation from the outside for the first time, seeing the shape of 7 years from an angle he'd never had access to. She didn't watch him do it, but she was aware of it, the periodic stillness when he reached something that required sitting with, the way he set certain files aside with more deliberateness than others. At 4 in the morning, she set down her pen. She looked at what she'd built. 67 pages of counter-documentation. Every falsified record addressed individually, every metadata discrepancy cataloged with the source document comparison, the channel structure mapped in full with the legitimate operational explanation beside Carbone's constructed criminal reading of it. Kellerman's routing information handled, Dana's name protected, Kellerman's access identified as an unwitting source rather than an active participant, which the evidence supported. Marcus's role documented completely. The origin of the scheme traced back 11 years through the Gerard Falk connection, the consultant whose death had closed one trail, but whose early communications Damian had found in his father's physical records, and which Ivy had cross-referenced to establish the timeline. 11 years, not 7. Carbone had started planning before Damian's father had died. She looked at that page for a long moment, then she handed it across the table. Damian read it. His face stayed level, but she watched his hand on the table, the fingers, the way they pressed once against the surface and released. "He was targeting my father," he said. He was targeting the operation, she said. Your father was the operation. He looked at the page for another moment. My father died of a heart attack, he said, at 61. He was healthy. She held his gaze. She didn't say anything. He looked back at the page. His jaw moved. I can't prove that from what's here, she said carefully. What I can prove is the scope of the infiltration, the timeline, and the constructed evidence package. What it implies about the circumstances of 11 years ago is something separate. Yes, he said, flat. Damian. He looked at her. One thing at a time, she said. A long moment. He nodded. Once. She turned back to the documentation. I need one more thing. The package Carbone is submitting needs to be received by the right people with the counter documentation already in their hands, not after. If they receive the falsified package first, even a perfect counterargument runs uphill. I have a contact, Damian said. A prosecutor? Adjacent, he said. Someone who has been looking at Carbone's organization for 3 years through other channels. Someone who would find a complete evidence package with documented source materials and metadata proof to be very different from a single anonymous submission. Can you reach them at 4 in the morning? He looked at her. Yes, he said. She pushed the documentation across the table. He picked up his phone. The prosecutor's name was Elaine Marsh, and she answered on the second ring, which told Ivy something about the nature of the contact and the state of whatever case she'd been building. Damian spoke to her for 9 minutes. He laid out the framework, the 7-year intelligence operation, the falsified evidence package, the metadata documentation, the timeline extending to 11 years. He spoke with the particular clarity of someone who has organized complex information correctly and is presenting it in sequence rather than pushing it. Elaine Marsh asked 4 questions. Damian answered 3 and said the documentation would answer the 4th. When he ended the call, he sat for a moment looking at the phone. She's had a preliminary file on Carbone's port activities for 14 months, he said. She's been unable to move forward because the documentation kept pointing toward my operation as the source rather than the target. Ivy looked at him. Because Marcus was feeding her the constructed narrative. Incrementally, anonymously, keeping her looking in the right direction to stay occupied and the wrong direction to build a case. He was using federal attention as a fence, she said, keeping the investigation close enough to create legal pressure on your organization, but managed enough that it never reached the point of action. Yes. She thought about the precision of that, the long-game thinking required to sustain it. A federal investigator pointed at a target, kept warm but never brought to temperature. Carbone managing 2 parallel processes, the investigator and the attrition, with the same embedded asset. He's very good, she said. Yes, Damian said. Was, she said. He looked at her. Is, he said. Until the documentation is in Marsh's hands and she's had time to verify it. Until then, the package he's built still exists and he still has the capability to submit it. She looked at the clock on the wall. 4:17. How long until he files? If he held to the timeline he gave you, 4 hours from the call, we have approximately 50 minutes. She looked at the documentation. Can Marsh receive and verify in 50 minutes? She's already reading the preliminary materials I sent during the call, he said. But full verification. He stopped. No. She looked at the 67 pages. She thought about the metadata, about the 19 documents, about the single 19 documents, about the single consistent flaw. The creation timestamps misaligned with the cross-reference log dates by 4 to 11 days across all of them. Consistent enough to be impossible as error, simple enough to be checked quickly. Call her again, she said. He dialed. She took the phone when Elaine Marsh answered. The fastest thing in the package, Ivy said, is the metadata comparison on the falsified documents, pages 12 through 31. Each document has 2 dates, the stated creation date and the cross-reference log date from the account management system. Every single one of the 19 documents shows the cross-reference log date between 4 and 11 days earlier than the creation date. Marsh was quiet. Ivy heard paper. Which means, Ivy continued, The cross-reference entry, which Marcus controlled, was logged before the document it references was created, which is only possible if the document was created to match an existing false record, not the other way around. It's a construction error. He built the ledger first and built the supporting documents after, and the timestamps show the sequence. A pause. "How confident are you in this?" Marsh said. Her voice was the voice of someone doing two things at once, talking and looking. "I've cross-checked it 3 ways," Ivy said. "The source documents are in the package, pages 3 through 11. The metadata extraction methodology is on page 12. If you look at document 7 first, it has the largest discrepancy, 11 days, and cross-reference to the account log entry on page 8, the sequence is unambiguous." Silence. Paper moving. A longer silence. "I see it," Marsh said. "That single pattern across all 19 documents," Ivy said, "is enough to establish that the evidence package was manufactured. Everything else in the documentation builds on that foundation, but that's the foundation." Another pause. "Who are you?" Marsh said. "Someone who reads numbers for a living," Ivy said. She handed the phone back to Damian. He spoke with Marsh for another 4 minutes. When he ended the call, he set the phone on the table and sat for a moment with his hands flat on either side of it. "She's filing an emergency preservation order," he said. "It blocks any competing evidence submission in the related case file until the authenticity review is complete." "How long does the review take?" "With what we've provided. Days, not weeks." He paused. "Carbone's package, if he submits it, goes into a frozen file behind an authenticity question that our documentation raised first. He loses the timing." She absorbed that. "He'll know," she said. "When the preservation order hits, he'll know the counter documentation was submitted." "Yes. So the federal strategy is done," she said, "which leaves him with whatever else he has." Damian looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. Carbone came at 6 in the morning, not to the New Jersey facility. She thought about that later, the geography of it, the choices that determined what happened where. He came to Damian's Tribeca building, the restored penthouse, the biometric locks, the floor-to-ceiling windows. He came with 9 men and a certainty, she thought, that the night's failures had not been strategic losses, but tactical interruptions, that the plan that had survived for 7 years could sustain 2 nights of friction and still arrive at its intended destination. He was wrong. Damian had spent 40 minutes of the drive from New Jersey on the phone, and the men positioned in and around the Tribeca building when Carbone's convoy arrived, numbered 14, with Rourke running the ground-level coordination from a vehicle 2 blocks east. Marsh had been informed. Marsh had her own people moving, though they moved with the deliberate pace of process rather than the speed of crisis, and the crisis happened first. Ivy was not supposed to be in the building. She was supposed to be in the vehicle 2 blocks west, in a car with a driver whose only instruction was to go if anything went wrong and not to stop until she was in a federal field office with her name in the intake log and the counter documentation on a flash drive in the officer's hand. She was in the vehicle. She was in the vehicle for 11 minutes. Then the driver's radio crackled with something she couldn't fully hear, and the driver's posture changed, and she said, "What was that?" And the driver said, "Stay in the vehicle, Miss Callahan," with the particular emphasis that told her it was something she was not going to stay in the vehicle for. She got out. She went in through the service entrance she now knew about, down the freight corridor, up the elevator she now knew about, and came out into the penthouse in time to see the main room in a state she hadn't seen it in before. Furniture displaced, one of the large windows spiderwebbed from something that had hit it, 2 of Damian's people in the room moving with purpose, and a third sitting against the wall being attended to. From somewhere deeper in the apartment, the lower level, the secondary corridor, she heard voices. One of them was Damian's. She followed it. The corridor led to what she'd thought was a storage room and turned out to be a secondary access to the building's service infrastructure. Pipes, conduit, a narrow concrete space that opened at the far end into a stairwell. The stairwell connected to the building's underground parking structure. The parking structure was where she found them. The space was concrete pillars and low lighting and the smell of exhaust embedded in the air over years, and it was large enough that she couldn't see all of it from the stairwell door. She heard the voices before she saw anything. Damian's, measured and exact, and another voice she hadn't heard before in person but recognized the quality of immediately. The quality of a man who had spent a long time being the most dangerous person in whatever room he occupied and had the stillness that comes from that. Vincent Carbone was older than she'd imagined from the voice on the phone. 60, or past it, with the kind of face that had been hard for a long time and had set into it. He was well-dressed in the way that men of his generation with his resources were well-dressed. Not fashionable, just correct, everything fitting as it should. He stood in the middle of the parking structure with two men remaining beside him and a gun in his right hand that he held with the casualness of long familiarity. Damian stood 15 feet from him, alone. His jacket was gone somewhere, his dark shirt had a tear at the shoulder she hadn't seen before, and he was holding his left arm slightly away from his body in the way people hold an injury they haven't assessed yet. His right hand was at his side, empty. "You built a better counter than I expected," Carbone said. He didn't raise his voice. The concrete carried it. The metadata. That was elegant. Marcus missed it. He built the package over 3 years, and he missed a timing error in the system logs. A pause. "I've been in this business for 40 years. The things that end you are never the things you anticipated." "No," Damian said. "Your father was the same," Carbone said. "He anticipated everything. He had contingencies for contingencies. Brilliant man." He paused. "He never anticipated the thing that came from inside." Damian's jaw was tight. She could see it from where she stood. "Your father and I," Carbone said, "had an arrangement. Years before you knew what his business was. He agreed to give me the Newark facility as a condition of his operation's safety. He agreed, and then he changed his mind. Men of principle." The word carried something that wasn't quite contempt. It cost him more than the facility would have. She watched Damian's face. She watched him absorb that. The confirmation of what the documentation had implied, said plainly in a parking garage at 6 in the morning by the man who'd decided it. And she watched him hold it. "And when I inherited," Damian said. "I decided to be patient," Carbone said. "Take it slowly. Take more than the facility. Take the whole operation, piece by piece, in a way that couldn't be traced back and couldn't be resisted. It was better than what your father owed me." He looked at Damian with something that might, in a different context, have been respect. "You built well. Harder to dismantle than I projected. You should take some satisfaction in that." "I'll take it later," Damian said. Carbone looked at the gun in his hand, not raising it, just acknowledging it. "Marsh will complete her review. I understand that. The federal channel is closed." He looked back at Damian. "This is what remains." "Yes," Damian said. "The facility," Carbone said. "The contracts. In writing, before I leave this building. Or we settle it here, and I acquire them through the estate." Damian looked at him for a long moment. "You came here to negotiate," Damian said. "At 6 in the morning, with 9 men, through the front entrance of a building where you knew I'd be expecting you." "I came here to conclude," Carbone said. "You came here because it's over, and you know it," Damian said. "Marsh has the documentation. The preservation order is filed. By the time you reach an attorney, the authenticity review will be far enough along that no submission of the falsified package has any value." He paused. "You spent 11 years on this, and it's gone in 48 hours because a woman texted a wrong number." Carbone was still. "The gun doesn't change what Marsh has," Damian said. "It only changes what happens to you afterward." A long silence. Carbone looked down at the gun again. She saw his 2 remaining men shift, the shift of people recalculating odds. She stepped out from the stairwell door. She didn't plan it. She did not make a decision to step out. Her body simply moved, the same way it had moved in the loading bay, the same instinct that had picked up the chain, the same functional clarity that arrived when the alternative was standing still. All 4 of them looked at her. She looked at Carbone. "The account in my name," she said. "The 43,000. I need that reversed." Carbone looked at her with the expression of a man encountering something unexpected and trying to classify it. "You're the wrong number," he said. "Yes," she said. "And I'm the one who found the metadata discrepancy, so I'd like to talk about the account." Something moved through Carbone's face. Not amusement, exactly. The recognition of something he hadn't planned for. The only kind of recognition that had any weight left, after a night in which the plan had come apart by degrees. "You're not afraid," he said. "I'm very afraid," she said. "The account." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked at Damian, and she saw, in that look, the conclusion of a calculation. Not surrender. Men like this didn't reach conclusions that looked like surrender, but the recognition of a terminus, the end of a sequence that had run for 11 years and been stopped by the thing he'd acknowledged himself, the unanticipated thing. He lowered the gun. He handed it to the man on his right. "Have your attorney contact mine," he said to Damian. His voice was level, conversational, as if they'd been discussing a contract dispute. "The account will be reversed by end of business. Consider it a professional courtesy." Then he walked past Damian toward the parking structure exit. His 2 men followed, and Marsh's people, who had been in position in the structure for the last 12 minutes waiting for the wire Rourke had given them, met him at the exit. Ma'am. She sat on the hood of a car in the parking structure and watched the procedural aftermath of things concluding. People moving with purpose, documents changing hands, voices on radios. Rourke directing something near the exit. 2 of Damian's people she didn't know standing at intervals along the wall in the posture of men whose job had just changed from active to complete. Damian came and stood beside her. She looked at his left arm. "How bad?" "Bruised, maybe a small fracture." He didn't look at it. "You came in." "You noticed?" "You were supposed to be in the vehicle." "I know." He looked at her. She looked back at him. They stayed that way for a moment. "The metadata," he said. "You told Marsh the fastest path through the documentation. It was the strongest thread. You gave her the specific pages, the specific document to look at first. Document 7 had the largest discrepancy. Ivy." She looked at him. "You've been doing this," he said, "the entire time, finding the fastest path, the fire suppression alarm, the chain. Document 7. He paused. "None of it was what you were supposed to do. None of it was what I planned to do," she said. "That's different." He was quiet for a moment. "Why did you come back in?" he said. She thought about it. "Because you were in here," she said, simply. The parking structure was quieter now. The procedural sounds were moving toward the exit, following Carbone and Marsh's people in the particular momentum of official processes that had been set in motion and would continue without requiring additional witnesses. Damian sat beside her on the hood of the car. She felt the shift in the metal. His shoulder was close to hers. "My father," he said. She didn't respond. She waited. "I suspected it," he said, "for a long time. The circumstances there were things that didn't add up. I told myself they didn't add up because I wanted there to be an explanation other than the obvious one." He paused. "I told myself a lot of things for a long time." She looked at the concrete pillar across from them, at the water stain on it from a leak in the ceiling, a gray spreading mark, the kind that kept coming back. "He confirmed it," she said, "in a parking garage, which means it's on record." She looked at Damian. "Marsh has the wire recording." He was still. "Yes," he said. She looked at his profile, the jaw, the dried cut above his eye, the line of him. "One thing at a time," she said again. He looked at her, and something in his face did the thing she'd been watching for, the thing that happened when the management came down, when the controlled stillness gave way to whatever was underneath it. Not collapse, not softness, exactly. Something more fundamental than either of those. The face of a man at the bottom of something, standing on actual ground. He reached out and put his hand over hers, where it rested on the car hood. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat in the parking structure of a Tribeca building at 6:40 in the morning, with the sounds of conclusion moving around them and the cold concrete air settling and the city somewhere above them starting its unremarkable daily beginning. The following weeks had their own exhausting choreography. Marsh's review took 9 days. The counter-documentation held, not without challenge, not without 3 separate meetings in which Ivy sat across from federal attorneys and walked through the methodology page by page with the patience of someone who has explained a spreadsheet to people who don't want to understand it and found a way to make them understand it anyway. The metadata discrepancy was the foundation. Everything else was architecture built on it. The falsified evidence package was formally discredited on a Thursday afternoon. She found out by text from a number she'd added to her contacts by then. 2 words from Damian. It held. She was in her apartment in Astoria when she read it. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the remains of breakfast and the buzzing overhead light that the landlord had finally fixed the previous week, replacing it with one that worked, a small and ordinary correction that she'd noticed more than she expected to. She texted back. I know. She didn't know. She'd hoped. But she'd built it as well as she knew how to build anything, and she'd followed the thread correctly, and she'd made Marsh look at document 7 first. She made herself breakfast. She ate it. She washed the cup. The medical debt was resolved the following Monday. A transfer from an account she didn't recognize, routed through 2 intermediaries and landing as a payment directly to the creditor rather than to her. Clean, deliberate, untraceable as a gift rather than as compensation. She thought about calling to say something about it. She thought about what she would say. She called. He answered on the second ring. The debt, she said. Yes, he said. You didn't run it through my account. No. Specifically to make sure it didn't look like what Carbone constructed, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That was careful. You paid for it, he said. The work you did was worth more than $43,000. It was worth more than I can reasonably put in a bank transfer. You could try, she said. A pause. I could, he said. The silence between them was comfortable in the way silences between people become comfortable only after shared experience of a specific kind. The kind that bypasses the usual sequence of getting to know someone and drops you straight into something more essential. Rourke says Chen is out of the hospital, she said. Last week. He'll have a scar. I'm glad he's out. He asked about you, Damian said. He wanted me to pass along that the fire suppression alarm was, in his professional assessment, a very good idea. She looked at the window above her kitchen sink, the morning light coming in, the buildings of Astoria going about their business through the glass. Damian, she said. Yes. Your father. A pause, different from the others. Marsh has the recording, he said. She's opening a separate inquiry. It will take a long time. It may not resolve into anything prosecutable. It's been 11 years, and Carbone will have his attorneys working on the recording's admissibility before the day is out. But you know, she said. I knew, he said. I just know differently now. She held that. Is that better? She said. The pause was longer. I don't know yet, he said. She nodded to herself. That was the right answer. That was the answer of someone telling the truth about something they hadn't finished processing, and she thought, briefly, with the same precision she brought to account records and metadata and the logical structures of things, that she trusted that kind of answer more than the other kind. She looked at her kitchen, the fixed light, the clean cup drying beside the sink, the window with its ordinary view. The job I had, she said, at the hospital, before the restructuring. What about it? That kind of work, she said. Finding the things in the numbers that aren't where they should be, following what the data actually says instead of what the categorization tells you. She paused. It turns out I'm good at it. A beat. I'm aware, he said. Forensic accounting, she said. The legitimate kind. There are firms that do it. She paused. I'm thinking about looking into it. A longer pause. That's a good idea, he said. I know, she said. I'm also thinking that there might be some utility in having someone with that skill set available on a consulting basis to organizations with complex financial structures. Silence. Organizations, he said, with 14 months of verified records and 3 months of new operational documentation that needs independent review. For instance, she said. She heard faintly something that wasn't quite a laugh but was in the vicinity of one. The same sound that had come out of him in the loading bay with the chain around a man's legs. the same quality of real and unperformed. For instance, he said. She looked at the morning. Outside, a taxi went by on the street below. A dog was being walked on the opposite sidewalk by a woman who was looking at her phone and trusting the dog to navigate. The everyday mechanics of a city moving through its morning with the comprehensive indifference that cities have, the way they continue regardless of what happened the previous night or the night before that. She thought about a text message, one wrong digit, a moment of carelessness in the rain outside a restaurant, her fingers moving too fast, the number going somewhere it wasn't meant to go. She thought about the word stay. She thought about how sometimes the thing that changes the course of something enormous is not enormous itself, is not planned or strategic or the result of careful preparation. Is a woman standing under an awning in the rain typing the wrong number because she needed someone to give her an excuse to leave a table she should never have been at? "I'll send you the consulting terms in writing," she said. "I'd expect nothing less," he said. She ended the call. She stood in her kitchen in the light of a Tuesday morning and let the quiet settle around her. The particular quiet of a thing that has finished, not suspended, finished, all the way through, every thread accounted for and in its place. She rinsed her cup, put it away, picked up her phone and searched. Forensic accounting certification programs. New York. The results came back quickly. She scrolled through them with the same methodical attention she brought to account records and metadata timestamps and the places in a ledger where the numbers said something different than the story around them. She found one that looked right. She clicked on it, and outside her window, the city continued its morning, ordinary and vast and full of the random collisions that turn out to matter. A taxi, a dog, a woman on her phone, and somewhere across the river a man with amber eyes and a scar above his left eyebrow, sitting at a long walnut desk, looking at a phone that had just gone quiet, not yet putting it down.